Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happen to stand to this Truth Bomb riff. This is the 722nd edition, although the first episode of 2026. We are recording this on January 4th, 2026, on a Sunday, following the military incursions into Venezuela, and I'm speaking with my good friend Reagan Boychek, who comes to us from Alberta, Canada. He is someone with a lot of deep insight into all of the elements that surround what we're in the midst of, and he's also in terms of his background and his education, somebody who studied political science. Pardon me, I'm having a little problem with my mouth at the moment, and also journalism. But interestingly enough, in this age where truth doesn't have a lot of value, he finds himself having to supplement what his expertise is by roofing and providing for six children in Canada, which cannot be an easy task. So I welcome you to the discussion. But before we get rolling, I guess I just want to set the table that we were all bombarded with news of the late night, early morning incursions, military incursions that seem to be um, pretty widespread and pretty, shall we say, ginormously planned, even though we could see the writing on the wall over the course of the last several months, obviously, with the shooting of the gunboats and the carrier group and all of the rest of it, and the turned up rhetoric and so on and so forth. But I'm curious, what are your initial thoughts, Reagan, after just the immediacy of the I guess we could call it an invasion, but just military incursion, nonetheless. What are your initial thoughts?
Well, the historical parallels are just screaming. I did my master's thesis on the coup in Haiti in 2004. That Canada was intimately involved in kidnapping the president of Haiti, taking him to Africa, followed by a brutal regime hunting down democratic activists, union leaders, etc. And that was in 2004. 2 years earlier, they tried something similar in Venezuela against President Hugo Chavez, and there was a coup in April 2002, I believe. But they made the mistake of not getting the president out of the country, and popular uprising returned the president to power, even though the United States and Canada had already recognized the coup government that was briefly installed in 2002. So by 2004, they'd learned their lesson. You got to get them out of the country. And it was Canadian special forces that secured the airport in the Haitian capital, Port-au-Prince, in February 2004 to escort the democratically elected president to the Central African dictatorship, the Central African Republic back then. And so this looks incredibly like that. And while every journalist is obligated to treat whatever politicians say as good faith truth, and so everyone's confused about the anti-intervention, anti-war President Trump doing such a thing, while it's actually entirely consistent with the recent actions of the United States government. And contrary to popular belief, none of this is contrary to the UN Charter or the rules upon which the United Nations was established in 1945. The U.S. veto and the Monroe Doctrine were maintained by the dealings that went in behind that, and everyone was satisfied and recognized because the U.S. was the only ones on Earth who had atomic weapons and had used them. And that was the moment when they turned that to their advantage and kept secret colonies like Canada, Venezuela, that they had privately owned and operated as colonies for a long time. And after 1945, there are certain appearances. But as Trump recently reminded everybody, Americans believe they own that oil in Alberta and in Venezuela. And so I've been writing for the last couple of years that the U.S. carried out a similar, softer coup in Alberta in 2022, reestablishing their control of all the oil here. And all of this talk about the Monroe Doctrine and what it's actually meant over the last 200 years and how that played out in Venezuela and Alberta has had me quite concerned, trying to raise awareness of the fact that Canada is a American colony and Venezuela was, for most of the century in 1908, Standard Oil imposed a ferocious dictator, Gomez, in Venezuela. And he ruled until 1935 when he died, a couple months after the U.S. installed the premier in Alberta, who would later give away all of the oil for free to the Rockefellers. A couple weeks after the 24-year-old Bible student was installed as the premier of Alberta in 1935, 2 weeks later, Huey Long, the senator, was assassinated, clearing the path for Roosevelt's third term to incorporate Canada as a colony. And Venezuela's had a very similar fate, being the dictators knew you just don't mess with the oil and everything will be fine. You can become one of the richest people in the hemisphere as long as you don't interfere with the Americans' oil. And so it's rather disconcerting. Not just my inability to raise these issues over the last couple of years, the complete refusal of the media and academia in Canada to face these issues as we're being threatened or reminded that we're the 51st state, while Trump refuses to rule out military action against Greenland, as there was lots of talk about that in 1940 when they were absorbing Canada as well. And we see the armada around Venezuela and now a Haitian-style coup, kidnapping the president, and it shows a really shocking level of collaboration, corruption, or what you can get with a gun pointed at a country's head. That there was an enormous amount of cooperation for a couple dozen people to dip in and out with the president unharmed, losing no people or equipment is a message to the rest of the world about the control that the U.S. enjoys in many foreign countries like Canada and Venezuela. And you would have picked Venezuela as the leader of the most independent, uppity. They have tens of millions of armed residents ready to defend their country and their oil. But it doesn't look like they're going to get any sort of chance. And now they don't have a president. And that is the sort of control I've been warning about. I live it here in Alberta. There's been threatening of more and more of it. And to a T, across even the most radical journalism today, it's dismissed as, I don't think that Venezuela stuff is about oil. And, oh, didn't he just say the silliest things? Everybody making apologies and excuses has the world's largest armada. No, it couldn't be. No. Oh. And what are they going to say now? And so once again, batting 1,000, journalism and academia fell for it. It's made. And so it's quite something to witness in real time. It's you couldn't have convinced anyone this was coming not that long ago. But only you are unsurprised, and your understanding makes it all intelligible. It cuts through all the BS and explains why we can't have a debate about this stuff because it's just too bald-faced obvious.
Well, this is why I wanted to reach out to you this morning. In fact, I wanted to yesterday as well. Apologies for the delay. Life got in the way, but this has been what's undergirded our conversations from day one, and disconcerting to say the least, considering what you and your colleagues and your countrymen in Alberta may be facing here in the very near future. Obviously, you laid the groundwork in a brilliant way, and we'll touch upon all of those contextually. A couple of thoughts. Initially, I saw a meme display which I thought captured the zeitgeist very clearly, it had a big picture of Dick Cheney, kind of an animated picture of Dick Cheney, and he's kind of frothing at the lips, wishing he could have been involved, in the vice presidency or in his position as Darth Vader, taking back to what the American oil companies say are ours, before all of the revolutionary sort of techniques of what took place in Venezuela that you just mapped out. But I was interested. A couple of things earlier this morning. I just happened to see on my feed, Ed Norton of the Geopolitical Report. I was curious to see how he was going to frame this because Venezuela has certainly been a topic that he likes to endeavor, as well as Saudi Arabia, of course. But as far as you and I go, we're the ones that fully gestate the intersection of all things fossil fuel dependence paradigm and the financial criminal paradigm that we've been trying to uncover for some time for the American people. And I will also offer that right before I called you, I watched a podcast from a gentleman by the name of Patrick Boyle. And Patrick Boyle is kind of a well-known, I don't know, influencer, podcaster in the arena of finance. And I think he's from Ireland originally, but he's definitely on Wall Street. But he was talking about algorithms. And he was talking about the nuances of what he's been able to discover actually triggers the algorithms one way or the other. And this is only going to be exemplified further as we see mainstream media in the pocket of the what we've been living for our entire lives, but now it's just completely out in the open. In terms of familiarity, I mean, my God, when we were thinking about oil for democracy, think about all of George Bush II's incarnations in the Middle East post 9/11, to force democracy. Yeah, right, George. Yeah, democracy had nothing to do with it. It was always about the amalgamation of all things fossil fuel global economy and the paradigm of which it sits, particularly as it results with the dollar's position as the world's reserve currency. So as we go through this conversation, I hope you'll address, how this plays in with BRICS, how the timing of this plays in, to what end, and how close or far away are we now from, a BRICS currency maybe absolving the dollar's role as the world's reserve currency. But in the back door, you're wondering, okay, what is exactly Putin's role because of Venezuela, because of Ukraine, because of what may or may not be taking place in China? This seems to undergird what you've been warning about from the beginning of when we started talking about that there's going to be a giant global financial calamity that is then followed by some enormous global, war, whether it's a world war, or it's a proxy war, or it's some variation. But I couldn't help but feel when I was waking up to yesterday's news. I just heard Warren Zevon in the back of my mind. Just send lawyers, guns, and money, because that's been the Latin America geopolitical scenario of the American, let's call it now Donroe doctrine, but throughout the entirety of everything from Contragate. I mean, my God, this goes on from Panama forward. But I'm going to share my screen real quick, and I'm going to get your thoughts. Just I want to show it to the audience real quick first. Just the cover page of the New York Times, because I think this exemplifies a lot, right? Just in terms of how mainstream media covers it compared to what we're going to talk about. So in the reaction, we have Trump plunges U.S. into a new era of risk in Venezuela. Okay, not like the last 2 months, we're pretty much already there. And then, of course, the headline is U.S. will keep troops in the Caribbean as leverage on Venezuela, Rubio says. But probably the biggest, sort of, I don't know, shall we say, hint into what's really undergirding this whole thing and what the questions need to be in terms of what happens internally, especially with Congress and what's left of Congress, not to mention what's going to play out in the courts. But in this headline on the left, it says indictment cites cocaine trade in which Venezuela's role is believed to be modest. So that's first and foremost. But also, I wanted to just shed light, a pardon and a prosecution. This article right here lays it out clearly. A pardon and a prosecution in New York show Trump's personal geopolitics. So it's just the ridiculous hypocrisy of pardoning Juan Orlando Hernandez, of course, who was guilty of 400 tons of cocaine in the United States, former president of Honduras, which was a vector in the trade of cocaine from Colombia and I guess Venezuela. But for however long with CIA involvement, and we know what that means with conjugate and so forth. But obviously, a couple of things to respond to, and I'm sure your mind is swimming a million miles a second. The first question we want to talk about, in my opinion, is the geopolitics of the fossil fuel financial paradigm, and particularly how it relates to other countries such as yourself and Alberta as we start to see the direction of the next, I don't know, 4 to 6 months, particularly.
Well, we found each other because of the parallels and overlaps between the financial fraud that you chronicled after 2008 and the financial fraud in the Alberta oil and gas industry. The way that worked on Wall Street has inspired my research. And you can say the sum total of the British Empire around 1700, 1702, King William III died, and his niece Anne took over for 12 years. And there was a revolution in British finance, British journalism, economics in that period that led to the Mississippi scheme, the bubble in France, and the South Sea bubble in Britain, both imperial frauds that enriched the imperial class, incredible corruption, insider trading. And it was those 12 years that newspapers were invented. London had one newspaper when Queen Anne took over, and she cracked down fiercely on journalists who said anything she didn't like, put them in prison, put them in the pillory, and then hired them all as spies. And then passed the world's first copyright law, giving journalists the right to earn a living from their writing. And so all of these bowed and corrupt journalists became her mouthpieces for the South Sea bubble and the Mississippi system, which tanked the rival empire of France, who had 10 times the debt of Little Britain. But the British tricked the French into appointing a convicted murderer or accused manslaughterer to be their finance minister, and he created the Mississippi bubble that tanked the French Empire, tanked their financial system, and the British just tagged along and dumped their state debt into that pyre of the world's first stock market bubble, fed by the first economists who were the bankers, insider trading, making millions, faking their death to escape. And that's was all really about Canada and the oil they already knew was there. The 175 billion barrels of oil in northern Alberta that became legal collateral in 2003 and led to the 2008 financial crisis. It was first discovered, first recorded in June 1715, when an Indian slave told the governor of the Hudson Bay Company about oil so thick that you can't even park your canoe on the banks. There's so much of it. And in 1715, that was the real pivot point of the diversion to Louisiana and the South Sea bubble. That was a diversion that was scheduled to go down to elite debt forgiveness. The king and the state who'd ran up their debts running wars got debt forgiveness with the South Sea bubble in 1720. Britain was rejuvenated, debt-free. What are we going to do? We started subsidizing traders into India to get a treaty with India and a beachhead. 10 genocides later, by 1938, when they lost India and Canada, they'd stolen $45 trillion from India through the financial fraud of bills of goods, using just a financial trick of a bill of goods. Instead of money or gold or silver, they would give a bill of goods, which you would take to your local tax office, and they would give you rupees for your British bill of goods. But those rupees came from your neighbor who paid his taxes yesterday. That's not Britain's money. And so Britain just took your stuff and gave you a piece of paper. And that little trick, which came out of the first financial bubble, that's the empire Britain built. The financial revolution was stock market fraud in line with economists and journalists. That's what brought us the British Empire, that and genocide. And it has carried out and carried on. It's still about the oil in Alberta. It's enough carbon to cook the whole planet. It's enough oil to run a world empire, the military you could have, and it's all free. America steals all of it. The oil in Alberta since World War II is not paid for. The Rockefellers bought it from the Queen in 1906 in a backroom deal in London, but they bought all the rights that the Queen had asserted. Everything west of Manitoba is mine personally forever. In 1887, Canada's first prime minister passed a private law saying the Queen owns all of the minerals and resources forever. And in 1906, she sold them to the Rockefellers. So there was never any development or competition. It was all done behind closed deals. And it wasn't developed until after World War II. And then they stole it. All you had to do was pay 10 cents on the dollar in royalties in Alberta. And they didn't even pay that. And when it was revealed in the Alberta legislature in 1948 that, hey, imperial oil, Standard Oil, they're stealing all the oil in Leduc, the billion-barrel field just discovered. They're stealing all of it. So there was a vote of confidence, and the government that the Rockefellers had installed in 1935 fell. You can read the newspapers. It really happened. And except 5 days later, Alberta had the biggest oil field accident in Canadian history. An oil well blew out of control for 6 months, tens of thousands of barrels a day, until the government that the Rockefellers had installed in 1935 was reelected. And after it was reelected, the well was plugged, and we forgot it ever happened. But all of the oil in Alberta since 1947, including all of the oil sands, were given to the Americans for free by a 24-year-old Bible student that Standard Oil installed in 1935. And so kidnapping a president today is outside of the normal perspective of someone who went to American schools, but it's perfectly in line with the history across Latin America, across centuries, and even worse than Venezuela, in Canada, right next door. Trillions of dollars stolen, financialized through the banks, through Wall Street, and that is the fuel. That is the free lunch of tens of trillions of dollars that fuels the American empire and dictates what it does, what it wants to do, which drug dealers it lets out of prison, which it goes across the world to kidnap and bring back to prison. You have trouble making sense of that from the talking heads in journalism, but those yellow imperialist compradors have always been that way. If you see them properly, you can put together enough facts to make sense of what's going on. And that's the only way we'll have any hope of changing it or thwarting it. But locals being in charge of the resources under their ground is kind of the root of this whole game of history. And our only hope of survival is democratic control of resources, not letting imperial folks write letters patent in 1669 saying all of Canada belongs to my cousin. Like legally, that's still a thing here. That piece of paper is the whole game, but it doesn't have to be. If we were actually independent, if we actually had a constitution, if we're actually a republic, America shows how that's possible, shows how to put these financial criminals in prison. These are the imperialists. That's who Bill Black got in the 90s. And they've been running free again. But the only time these imperialists have ever been held accountable is by Bill Black and his friends that are still chomping at the bit to do so again today. And so they might not appreciate how closely related Alberta or Venezuela is to their Wall Street games, but that is what is afoot, and they're the only ones that could stop it.
They do, but I like you touched on a lot of very important elements that we're going to delve into a little bit more deeply, and obviously we'll lead it to what's behind me in the Clean New Deal because it hasn't been. There's no more better time or more transparent time for people to get their heads around what we're talking about because, first of all, it reminds me of David Byrne's, of course, wonderful insight from the '80s. I always kind of think of him as the seer, but when he said "same as it ever was," and that is indeed what you just talked about. Because for those who might have been a little bit confused about the time chronology of what my friend Reagan just laid out. I mean, oil has been known, I think, first discovered, according to Wikipedia that I just looked up when he was talking about 347 AD in China was the first known sort of documented sort of questioning of what oil may be, right? So that's a long time ago. But it wasn't until Edwin Drake, figured out the modern day drilling techniques, I guess, in 1857 that preceded all this stuff. And boy, did it just explode from that point forward. And everything post 2000, well, sorry, Jesus, post 1945, of course, in the American century, obviously, the correlation of defeating fascism, defeating the Nazi Empire, introducing this sort of Western democracies, but that were undergirded by this giant, enormous control of geopolitical resources, particularly oil, which undergirded the entire uh, economic global paradigm. Okay, I think as early as, not as early as recent, and this was my first documentary film, Reagan, in Forward 13, Waking Up the American Dream. We set forth that I believe somewhere in the vicinity of 78% of the global economy is interconnected to the fossil fuel paradigm. That this is an enormously interconnected, everything from plastics and all of the different molecular scenarios, used in a whole just panoply of industries, but particularly, of course, energy and everything else. And we've known throughout this whole time period as well, the incredible uh, consequences of unheralded uh, just emissions, right? And just the entirety of the climate uh, functioning, as it were. And this is, I think, been pretty much the writing on the wall since Donald Trump took to the podium at the United Nations about 4 or 5 months ago and literally declared war on renewable energies. Obviously, the mainstream media and late night show tacos would like to talk about Escalate Gate and all the buffoonery of the the of this idiocracy of Donald Trump, and it's more, shall we say, easy for people to comprehend and deal with when they have a slight degree of humor towards this guy's just complete moronic, bumbling through everything that takes place while simultaneously not recognizing or understanding or addressing that he's in control. And by he, I'm talking about this billionaire apparatus that put him there. That, of course, a lot of us talk about Project 2025. We talk about Russell Vogt. If you understand who Russell Vogt is, you understand Russell Vogt came out of Phil Graham's sort of development, Phil Graham being a senator in Texas in the financial industry, as well as connected to all things fossil fuel, deregulated all sorts of derivatives that led to Enron, as well as the 2008 great financial crisis. And the libertarian Koch brothers, of course, who came from oil, who created the John Birch Society, which is this whole incarnation of white supremacy and, the control of shall we say, in a religious theocracy, that's really all undergirded by oil, quite frankly. The Koch brothers, their father, Fred Trump, to be not to be confused with Donald Trump's father, Fred, Fred, but Fred Koch, of course, because he could not break the monopoly inside the United States that existed at the time, primarily that emanated from the Rockefellers. He went to Stalin and built Stalin's oil infrastructure, who for I think most of the last 60 years is the largest producer of oil until what we've done recently with fracking and everything else in the United States. So as I basically describe that sort of geopolitical construct, and ultimately we look at this incursion as it related to all of the things that are coming out that mainstream media and its echo chamber with all of these paid pundits who are just liars for the system are covering up, and they're reacting to this, that, and the other. And of course, war is good theater, right? And it's also a great technique of distraction, especially if you're trying to get away from the Epstein files and many of the other things, maybe the affordability crisis, this, that, and the other. But at the same time, of course, war is now in bodies and in destruction, and it's sincere and it's important. But what's undergirding it all, of course, is what Trump said out loud. It is all about oil. It's not about what we just exemplified, which was if it was about drugs and they're going to indict, I mean, this is the whole cover story. They're going to, they're bringing, in fact, they've already got him in Manhattan, Maduro and his wife, and they're going to indict them on drug trafficking charges. This, while 2 weeks ago, pardoning the largest drug trafficker of cocaine ever in U.S. custody that I'm aware of, and this is the former president of Honduras, and all of these other just insane things. So when we look at this, right, what we have to come to an understanding of, and I'm looking for your insight here, right? The correlation of history, the paradigms, the control, what we both know. In fact, this was another meme that I just saw, in addition to the Dick Cheney meme. This guy says something about, yeah, I can't remember the exact verbiage, but the subject was capitalism, right? Capitalism is creating this situation. Meanwhile, this person is unaware of the socialism for criminal billionaires that we've been laying out that is in this paradox of imperialism. It seems to me that imperialism is what we need to be focused on at the central primer, but baked into a global geopolitical fossil fuel matrix that's been in control the last 70 years. Maybe walk us through all of that, particularly bringing it back to further incursions into the likes of your predictions of Alberta and Greenland.
So, yeah, I think the key to making folks making sense of things is to stop paying attention to any so-called journalist who tells you what the president thinks or feels or believes about any politician. Like, stop. Like, there's no evidence anywhere any of those people believe anything. They will say and do anything, and so that's obviously ridiculous. So pay no attention to that. But their actions, what Trump is saying by blatantly pardoning, not on the last day of his office with shame and skipping away constantly all the time, pardoning people like massive state narco traffickers while supposed, okay, no one else in the world is confused about what he thinks or believes or blah. That sends a very clear message, and it's very consistent with British and American financial imperialism for 300 years. And that's part of what is so troubling about today's moment. It's not just a babbling idiot who became the president, stumbling through, contradicting himself, just accidentally recapturing the Rockefellers' assets. It's not an accident. It's quite consistent. And in the last century, throughout the sum total of imperial history, it goes in periods and bursts. Like, where did Britain come from? How did this little island come to control 40% of the world's surface? Like, what, when, how? Every other king wanted to be. How did that happen? And all of those bursts have a similar premise, not just the military means, but every king can do the same thing. What sets it apart, what sets new epochs, is changes in credit and liquidity. First, it was limited liability partnerships that gave a new sort of security to business, that allowed credit, that facilitated more growth. And so that led to all sorts of growth, and the creation of double entry bookkeeping to keep a track of that. Uh, and then the British Bill of Goods. It started locally as just a way to facilitate trade, but when you start doing it internationally in foreign countries, it turns into a giant financial fraud. And so bills of goods created trillions of dollars for those British to conquer and capture and run a navy to triangulate. And so those new forms of credit, and that was the British Empire's advantage. Once they imposed the gold standard, where everyone agreed that we will limit our money creation to the pile of gold we hold, which was a good idea for Britain, who held most of the gold. And it was an okay idea for Germany when they joined in 1871, because they just taken all of France's gold, having defeated them. And so when they joined this kind of straitjacket of limiting the amount of money they can create, Britain always had an extra advantage. They had the sterling area. All of their colonies also traded in silver. So there was two bases for British money creation, gold and silver. That was their advantage the whole time. It wasn't lost on the Americans. In the 1870s and 80s, there was a whole silver movement in the United States, because Oregon and Ohio and Nevada were producing most of the world's silver by then. And by the 1890s, the US was using gold and silver to back the American dollar. And that's how you buy enough military to take over the Spanish Empire. Briefly having two bases for your currencies gave America the ability to explicitly become imperialist, capture the Spanish Empire. And then in 1902, they went back to the gold standard, pretending to be quiet and isolationist. Go ahead, Germany, to lure them on. And so there's always been these free money episodes that lead to this sort of expansion. And so that's why cryptocurrency has been so troubling, and the debasement of the American dollar, the accumulating debt, the crisis that the elites seem strangely unconcerned about. They seem like barreling, totally ignorant again, towards a crash, because that's how their debts get forgiven. And that's how they can offload all of their bets, cash them in, change them for hard assets, just like in 1720. They've all been cashing out at the peak of the bubble. These are all the inside traders. They've been using their capital gains to buy media, to be able to censor, to be able to shape this, to be able to shape the legislation that's coming, to shape the narrative, because they won't tell you. We're all still playing dumb, barreling towards the crash. Everybody knows coming. They'll all play dumb till the moment it happens. Then, just like in 1720, all those paid propagandists, Jonathan Swift, Daniel Defoe, the second the South Sea bubble popped, they were your progressive heroes, telling you about how bad those guys were. They had just worked with for the last 12 years. And now that it was over, these guys were going to be your saviors. These were the progressives that were going to lead the debate and the reform. And that's what we're being set up for once again, unless we could finally see through it. Because
exactly.
You couldn't get away with it if people had a memory.
Well, okay. So it's like every sentence you say, it just makes my mind go 1,000 different directions, and it's brilliant, man. I thought I thought that section really delivered some powerful insight. A couple of things that it sparked in me was the correlation. Think about this, Reagan. It was obviously J.P. Morgan, the original, that saved the United States from the 18. Well, I guess it was at 1904. Was it 18? I'm trying to think of the real. I guess it was 1895-ish. There was a huge run where it was J.P. Morgan's gold that backstopped the federal government, and that's when we started to see the merger towards the Federal Reserve, obviously, right? And then just yesterday, I don't know if you happen to see, on Friday, I should say, I did an impromptu recording with the new Untouchables, including David K. Johnston, who revealed to us, and this is through DC Report, and this was in the midst of all of this folly that's taken place with Venezuela, but we're pumping billions and billions of billions into JP Morgan Chase right now, who apparently was making huge London whale-like bets on the silver market. So, my God, what I've been saying the whole times in terms of the Treasury and the Fed and everything that we've discovered post 2008 is what people need to wrap their heads around. What imperialism has always been doing, from where I'm standing, is A, it gets monopoly on the land itself. Obviously, it hurts everybody into its own serfdom, and then once it controls the entirety of all of land and the resources and everything else, when it runs out, there's kind of an equilibrium that has to be maintained. Otherwise, it has to expand, and that's what happened in imperialism. They went in, they raped and raped the resources of other countries with all sorts of incredibly diabolical schemes, particularly getting corrupt leaders to trade in their currency, and then they would bankrupt them and then ultimately come and then get all of their resources in their currency and then maintain this currency throughout. I mean, that was happening for several hundred years. And I loved your analogy, and I think it is exactly right, because I remember studying, because this whole time period right now reminds me of the robber baron era, right? What we're in the midst of is late 1800s, early 1900s. It's almost a step and repeat, not to mention, of course, not to be too subtle about it, but the Don Rowe Doctrine, which is absolutely insane considering this guy, five-time bone spur, six-time deferment, all of this other bullshit where he never served a day of his life in the military, suddenly has the most powerful military in the world at his disposal. And I keep hoping that there's going to be a fissure within everybody, because this is all going to have to happen at once. The Trump administration is so over its skis, whether it's the Epstein files and everything it's covering up, whether it's, which does have this, bipartisan connection, because, as much as I can't stand anyone that would ever be considered MAGA and all of its facets and everything else, you do see clearly that there is a desire, and there has been, to hold this elitism to some sort of accountability. Now, whether it's in their minds, it's just the Clintons and it's just, obviously Bill Gates and everybody associated with the Democratic Party and all of those things that led to Q. But there is a desire to ask the question, at least, wait a second. You mean there's two sets of laws? You mean that there's an aristocracy? You mean that these people who can rape and pillage, and literally in every facet of their existence, I'm sure the metaphor isn't lost on you, that the nature and the techniques that are used to set up vulnerable young girls in a situation to where they become prey, or they're preyed upon by these kind of drooling, just people that can't get enough of just exploitation and destruction and everything else, that they're above the law. And that would lead to not just the imperialism and the smash and grab techniques, and then ultimately, what we saw in the 2008 great financial crisis, which the liar's loans were just basically setting people up based on the hierarchy of needs to get them stuck in a situation they couldn't get out of, and they use those proceeds to gamble in every direction, including shorts, to basically destroy the global economy, but that they were untouchable because we pumped tens of trillions of dollars predicated on this fossil fuel paradigm that is only going to benefit whom? The oligarchs of the world that are the new aristocracy, the new tyranny. Is there anything that doesn't make sense in what I just laid out?
Not at all. From the perspective of imperialism, the linchpin of your story and mine is Federal Reserve Act 13.3 from 1913. In 1913, U.S. imperialism wasn't a secret. It was nothing to be ashamed of. Theodore Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson were unabashed, shameless, explicit imperialists. But after 1914, you weren't allowed to talk about it anymore. You don't talk about U.S. imperialism. You don't say it out loud. It doesn't exist. It's a miraculous trick. If everybody obeys that taboo, you can never make sense of anything. It's endlessly stupidity and repeat Groundhog's Day, but with the right perspective, it's perfectly consistent. And 13.3 is what you found at the root of $71 trillion illegally printed out of thin air and handed to these criminals on Wall Street. I know some criminals in oil and gas. You've done your homework. You know these guys aren't smart enough. You just know they're criminals. I know the oil industry enough to know they're not magic. They're criminals. And what explains all of them is that they're imperialists, and taking stuff for free from other people's land is the free lunch that leads to the free dollars, that leads to these a billion billionaires in America now. That's that do what? You don't even know their names. You couldn't even. Okay, that's $71 trillion being printed out of thin air, and that's just a political expression. The fact that you ever hear about them is that corrupt make believe money being created. And it's as we head to another crash, there's going to be consequences. When that bubble pops, either they will lose their fictitious assets or it'll be imposed by them like it was in 2008 when 10 million Americans lost their homes, almost all illegally. We're going to have that again if we don't see what's happening, if we don't prepare for it.
Well,
So the way 13.3 is connected is that's how you take the resources from Alberta and turn them into American dollars on Wall Street. And they wanted to do that the whole time. All of the oil in Alberta was sold by the British monarchy to the Rockefellers in July 9th, 1906. And so they already owned all of it. And so by 1913, when they're creating the Federal Reserve, they already own all those trillions of dollars of collateral that will one day be legal collateral so they can hit the button on their keyboard and make money. They already had Alberta in their back pocket in 1913 when you're not allowed to talk about imperialism anymore, and we have this secret ability to print unlimited money. Not explicitly, not for resources, but and when the president's the president, what you gonna do? And so they would have loved to have used that any time that things worked out well enough in the century before. They didn't use it for almost a century. In 1958, when Iraq had a revolution against the British monarchy and fell out of the Western Empire, all of that oil caused a major crisis in U.S. British imperialism. And so the U.S. immediately came to Alberta without asking anybody to say, we're going to drop a nuclear bomb in northern Alberta and melt the oil sands and double the world's reserves. But it didn't work out. The Canadian Prime Minister was a lawyer from Calgary who was no fool and successfully managed an international treaty banning nuclear testing because he was so opposed to nuclear testing. And, I guess you can't do that nuclear thing in Fort McMurray. Sorry, it's not you. And he got replaced in the next election in Alberta. But it wasn't until the invasion of Iraq. It wasn't until April 9th, 2003, when the Marines pulled down Saddam's statue in Baghdad, completing the occupation of Iraq. That was the day when $9 trillion worth of Alberta oil given to the Rockefellers for free, for the first time in history, became legal collateral at the bank. Take your license that you got for free saying, I own $9 trillion worth of oil. And they're like, would you like to borrow $4.5 trillion? It's in your account now. And tomorrow, Albertans will wake up, go to work, turn on the spigot, pull enough carbon out of the ground to repay the bank. The Rockefellers get $4.5 trillion of legal collateral. They start going door to door across America, trying to give away to colored people. First time in history, Redline America, they couldn't give away enough mortgages. You have to trick people, you have to rob people into giving away a mortgage. Like they had $4.5 trillion of new collateral. All they had to do was find some sucker to lend it to, starts turning into a revenue stream. And that's what led to the housing bubble and the crash. And then they illegally foreclose on millions of Americans, robbing them again. That is simply imperialism coming home. That now Americans are being treated like Albertans, being robbed and cheated and struck again. And don't go running to journalists to make sense of it or to tell the world. That's the thing about you and me, that the rest of the audience doesn't know much of this stuff because other journalists and news media won't report it. But we've learned some things, we have some credibility, and we know these journalists. We know what they know and what they don't say, And so when they say great things, that's great. It's easy. We'll cite it. It's credible, easy, accessible. It's always after the fact. But we also know what they do know, but don't report, and how it all fits together. And that is the Achilles heel, that shift in perspective. If people understood imperialism and financial fraud and and how Bill Black fits into that, they would know that the only time in the history of imperialism these guys have ever been stopped was with the savings and loan debacle, which is not unrelated to all this stuff or Alberta, but that's the only place in the world where this corruption, which is standard, Louis XIV, the French Republic, just insane corruption. Russia, the Soviets afterwards, insane. That's the rule everywhere. To the extent there's any limits on any corruption, that's great. That's better than most people, and it's better than the U.S. does either. Except in this one period, these one characters believed in the ideals and the premises that America was established on to success, much more than under slavery and independence or under the Civil War or after. But today, after the civil rights, everything, no, the last peg of the king, if those financial free lunches and fraud that keep raping and pillaging us to this day everywhere. These games is how the king and the royalty, this unaccountable class, still take every surplus dollar our economy can possibly generate, and then some. And if anything ever slows down, the wheels will come off, the bubble will burst. But they're not concerned about it. And when you understand how these bubbles have always worked and that the result is elite debt forgiveness, that explains why they are running us towards the cliff playing dumb, and they will clamor to sell us false solutions after, and we'll still be playing the same game. And it'll be really hard to make sense of if you're not allowed to say imperialism. But if you can, that's the vulnerability. And the scale of the crime means all of our solutions are secondary, easy. The politics are set. There's not, we can all agree paying for it isn't a problem. And that's what's like, we're at a scary moment. But what we know about it is it's also, there's still a chance, there's still a solution. It's not that we're too stupid. It's not that there's no money left. It's not that things don't work. It's just the royalty screwing us still. And Americans are the only ones who understood that enough to actually implement it. And it's desperately needed again today. Everybody should be able to agree on it, even Americans now. It's just too obvious, and you will be their next victims. There is, they don't even care about Americans anymore, let alone Albertans or Venezuelans. So all of us need Americans to live up to those ideals. And the Clean New Deal has lit the path there. The characters are waiting, and it should be the easiest thing to recruit people these days.
Well, and I appreciate that. Let me see if I'm on mute. Am I on mute or can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry about that. Because while you were talking, because I'm going to conclude with this, because I got to do other things, and it's just been great, and we could talk forever. But I want to, just pick up on what Reagan is saying. When I started my journey, it was after the 2008 great financial crisis. I, like Reagan, had studied political science. I also studied journalism. I'd been in production for a long time. I'd had a seat at the power. I understood paradigms and hierarchies. I understood geopolitics for most of my life. And I really thought I had a good understanding of where we were in the world and what was going on at all times, right? I kind of could see how things were happening in the political zeitgeist, and who was doing what, when, and how to make all of these things happen. What I wasn't seeing is what I couldn't see because it was in the shadows and it's part of asymmetric information. And it wasn't until I had my world completely smash in this sort of smash and grab, looting scenario, which is the entirety of imperialism. And it took me years to fully extrapolate and understand the parallels, but it's just incredible what is happening when you can't see it. And so ultimately, like I had to make up, all sorts of metaphors for me to be able to understand what I was looking at, usually through cinematic references. Like, for example, in The Usual Suspects, one of my favorite lines was, the greatest trick the devil ever played was to convince the world he didn't exist. And this is the construct of power. When you don't see the full picture, you don't fully understand what's at stake and how to remedy the problem. And so forever, I've described our effort as kind of the black box of the crashing American dream. And when you understand who did what, when, and how this whole thing happens, and by the way, the American dream is the Canadian dream. It's the democratic dream for all people of liberty and justice based on the integrity of law to rein in the worst of the impulses of humanity, which always ends in some sort of tyranny, right? Because that's what absolute power does. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. When a group of men discover plunder, they create a legal code to authorize it and a moral code to glorify it, for everybody befuddled asking themselves, how is it possible that this orange stain, who's been a criminal for decades, who's obviously treasonous, who's obviously covering for Epstein and everything that entails, how is it possible this guy is our president? Because you failed. You, the people, we, the people, you failed because you're not aware of how things work. You're not motivated. You're not activated. And when you're not motivated and when you're not activated, they will rape and pillage you until they can't anymore. That's what drug addicts do. That's what imperialism is. That's what absolute power is. It's crack for people like Trump, quite frankly, right? They just feed on more and more and more, and it's more diabolical, it's more disgusting, and it's a human trait. And how do you, throughout history, deal with that? Not asking for the answer. Let's let the viewers think about it. Maybe put it in the description. What do you do about it? Well, it's pretty clear. There's a couple of different roadmaps, but what you can't do is pretend like this doesn't exist. You can't do the Bernie Sanders where you say, hey, this country is for more than just the oligarchs, right? No, wait a second. The oligarchs have been stealing tens of trillions of dollars, destroying everything that matters, including the law. That's called tyranny. What is the United States? Why was the United States, with all of its flaws, it was to destroy the tyranny that was holding it back. Okay, created some other tyranny, and then we had to have more wars and civil rights and war on fascism. Okay, this is always all in. Are you on the side of liberty and justice for all and the integrity of law? Or are you just going to wait around until it doesn't affect you until it does? And then by that time, it's too late. So I'm going to share the screen with you just really quickly so I can kind of give you an idea of where I've come from. So when you look at the kind of sum total of my work, I want to just look at first, actually, if I can just, I don't know if that's going to show me, shucks. I just want to show people and I'm going to include this down below, a link to this film, my first film, Forward 13, Waking Up the American Dream, America for Sale. Basically, without knowing all of the information of Bill Black at that time, this was prologue to what I would learn and ultimately put forward in the con that basically sets the table for everything that we need to talk about moving forward into the cleannewdeal.org. But again, the con, anyway, you can just see the poster here. We were all sold a lie. This is what the entirety of the United States government wasn't able to do on behalf of the American people, because the entire system has been corrupt long before the Obama administration. But the Obama administration doubled down and allowed the financiers of Wall Street, who had just raped and pillaged the world, to get away with it. And we gave them tens of trillions of dollars, which gave the opportunity to the likes of the Kremlin and Donald Trump and everybody who's on the libertarian fascist side to say, well, if the Department of Justice isn't going to do its job and you're not going to hold power to account, we're going to take it all for ourselves, which is exactly what they've done. And what they've done is through Project 2025 and really everything that the libertarian billionaire think tanks have done over the course of the last I don't know, let's call it 6 decades now, they've gotten to a position where it's just basically a white supremacy, where LBJ said back in the 60s, if you can convince the lowest rung white guy that he's higher on the ladder than the highest rung black man, you can pick his pockets all day. Everybody is a target and a victim of imperialism. Okay. That's what tyranny does. And the only thing you can do to defeat that is to understand the paradigm and again, understand who did what, when, and how, and what it's all about. And so, what we lay out here is that we don't live in a democracy. We don't function in a capitalistic system. We don't have free markets. The law is unequal. We don't have separation of powers. Corruption rules everything. Millions are beginning to understand the threat of Project 2025, and the Clean New Deal is democracy's answer. Now, a key consideration here, when you look up at the top here, you see about us, how does this affect you, what we're going to do, the precepts of the Clean New Deal, which says exactly what has to happen in this movement, the civil rights like movement, to purge the tyranny of misery, to unleash the renaissance of possibility. But the only way you can fully do that, especially if you're a journalist out there, this is what the entirety of the system is hidden that Reagan interjected, and it is the bottom line of everything. Federal Reserve Act 13.3. The work that I've done here is I understood from the very beginning was that after the aftermath of the 2008 great financial crisis, the entire system was bankrupt. It was bankrupt because it was choking on its own polluted, toxic, lies in this paradigm of deception. All of that is illegal, but much of it, and this is how the whole pretzel logic thing plays out. President Obama at the time went on 60 Minutes and he literally said to the American people, what Wall Street did was unethical, it was disgusting, but it wasn't, and this is the key word, he said it wasn't necessarily illegal. That's legal speak for bullshit. What he was saying is you can argue certain aspects of all of the things that were going on if you don't have the evidence, just like the Supreme Court. When the Supreme Court says quid pro quo is not legal, you just have to prove these things. What the entirety of the Obama administration did not do was prove these things on behalf of America, because Mr. Ride in with his white horse, change we can believe in, wasn't working for the American people. Surprise. He was working for the financial system that obliterated the United States, the middle, they basically put the nail in the back of our democracy by destroying what was left of the middle class at that time. And so now when Zoran Mandani is talking about, affordability issues and this, that, and the other, and they're going to do things like free childcare, free bus transportation, and find a way to get, rent control in certain housing, he doesn't understand probably the bare basics of what made all of those things happen, unfortunately. I'm sure he can learn it very quickly. I'm not saying he's not capable of it, but his platform is so missing this because the likes of Bernie Sanders and AOC and everybody else, they chose not to fight this situation head on. They chose to play by the rules of the corrupt because they wanted to keep funding Medicare for all. They wanted to keep, the certain social security nets funded because they had a Faustian bargain that if they could get Dodd-Frank in the aftermath of the 2008 great financial crisis, that was good enough for them to prevent everything that created the 2008 great financial crisis. But here's the reality. Dodd-Frank didn't change anything. I just mentioned, what I laid out with the new Untouchables on Friday, that we're pumping now tens of billions of dollars illegally. And I know it's illegal because there wasn't a mandate of Congress. I mean, there are certain ways that certain banks can borrow with the overnight lending window and everything else. We're literally planting billions of dollars of infusion capital without any oversight into the largest bank in the United States for no reason and no questions asked. Sorry, that's not the way it's supposed to work. There are statutes in place that would prevent that sort of, what would we call that? What would you call that? To me, it sounds like aristocracy, does it not, based on everything we were talking about? Reagan?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the challenge of our age, is that we live post 2008, nobody held accountable. Like the wonderful quote from the 19th century economists you repeat so many times. We
Bounce
live
out.
in that age where they've established the laws, and that's what the think tanks are doing. They've legitimated all of it. It's now standard operating procedure. Whether you like it or not, it's now legal, accepted precedent.
But
And
it's not legal. That's the whole point. Nothing's
yeah,
changed. That's the element that I just mentioned about the Supreme Court post 14th Amendment Section 3 and all of these other things quid pro quo. They don't say out loud that you can have quid pro quo, even though, of course, we had Citizens United, right? So they're contradictory that way. The Supreme Court is just simply for the power that backdoors them billions of dollars now, which is pure corruption. And so ultimately, what I'm saying to the American people and what Reagan has demonstrated and what we both understand is that this entire global economy is created by the exorbitant privilege of the reserve currency of the dollar being predicated and tied to all things fossil fuel, first and foremost. That's what the paradigm has been since, quite frankly, 1945. It precedes 9/11. It is part of 9/11. I could go into 9/11 all day, every day about the neocons and about ultimately we had the ability to easily suppress the 9/11 attacks, and it led to 20 years of war, 25 years of war. That is, in the interim, had these giant fluctuations of these huge pump and dump schemes, these huge deceptive acts and practices, these global racketeering schemes that continue to go unabated, that nobody can stop because the uber powerful have all the control. And that's what you need to you need to open your eyes to, because ultimately, for those of you who want Medicare for all of you who want better education, for all of you who want a sustainable energy paradigm and everything else, yes, we can get all of those things like that if we have the power. That's the situation. We have got to retain power, and we've got to hold the criminals to account. And everything that I just showed you from Forward 13 through the con on is that we have been in the midst of the largest criminal racketeering plague in the history of the world. And that's saying something because, as Reagan has demonstrated, it's been pretty much this way since the 1700s. However, we just have technology, we just have more people, we just have more access to more money. So, yes, it's effectively larger. Trust me, if the guys in the 17th century had access to the technology that we do now, they would have done the same thing. But that's what we're trying to tell you, is that there's been these wars, there's been these elements of back and forth and the pendulum and everything else. And you have to choose which side you're on, because if you doubt us, look, on this white paper, all you got to do is look at the right. A detailed look at the Fed's bailout by funding facility and recipient, the illegal actions of the Federal Reserve, the most important of all, the audio interview with Rajan Cohen, who was from Sullivan and Cromwell, who, by the way, created the CIA. They were there to clean up all this business for the consortium of the banks. And he says exactly what they did, which proves it was completely illegal against the statutes of the Federal Reserve Act 13.3, which I lay out, which we learned after the Great Depression. And all of this is information that nobody learns in school. And there's a reason we don't learn this in school. It's because they don't want us to know this information. And it goes on and on. And I could go through every single thing, but I promise you, especially if you're a journalist, you go there, you will find the treasure trove, the Rosetta Stone, the Ark of the Covenant, whatever giant revelation of how this whole system works. Because if you can continue to fuel the paradigm that's destroying the world, what's it going to do, Reagan?
destroy.
That's it. So the precepts of the Clean New Deal, just really quickly, because I think that everybody out there has to understand these four questions of the perversion of power. I think, well, I'll just start with one. What is qualified immunity? Reagan, what is qualified immunity?
It's that the police can't be held accountable for their actions.
And if they're above the law and there can be tyranny, does that mean the law is supreme?
Certainly not. It seems like a dangerous situation.
Yep. And same with what is judicial immunity? If the Supreme Court can make decisions about, completely corrupting our system and whitewashing our history, is that something that the founders might have thought was something, was be possible, that the Supreme Court would literally betray the United States predicated on the law?
That's that immunity is the only way you will get the corruption that we now suffer. And so getting rid of that immunity would put an end to the corruption that we was obviously never intended, but has now plagues us. We are the depths of the U.S. experience.
So if the Supreme Court can make the president king, and in this case, the emperor's new clothes on really bad acid, a complete idiot who completely betrayed military service, has been a criminal for decades, working with enemies, continues to get backdoored billions of dollars of enemies while destroying people. I think the destruction of U.S. aid has killed over 600,000, mostly children in Africa so far. The consequences are unbelievable. And so if you've got the police above the law, the judges above the law, and the president above the law, what might you call that?
Well, the only thing you could not call it is a republic.
Amen. And you couldn't call it a democracy either, right? Especially where democracy, the notion is that one person, one vote, but basically that the law is above all else, really. And then ultimately, what's the ultimate trick here? The Electoral College, over the course of the last many cycles, going back to at least Al Gore and George Bush and the hanging chads and everything else, we've seen swing states choose who the president's going to be, and it's been manipulated. In 2020, there was a case that ended up, of course, Fonnie Willis's district down in Fulton County, Georgia, that was just actually thrown out, and Trump is basically pardoned from the situation where they used the electoral fraud to create fraudulent signatures to certify the election. They just were stealing the election. And that's just one reason why the Electoral College is dangerous to a democracy and ultimately is not a representative republic, not to mention the fact that the state of Wyoming, with an exorbitant amount of billionaires, has more legislative influence than does California with 50 million citizens. So when you put those composites together, I consider that the four questions of the Rubik's Cube that make you have the enlightenment that, oh, we're not a democracy and we're not, we don't function as capitalism ultimately. And I'll get to that point in a minute. We're a corporate fascist state undergirded by a criminal syndicate that uses the full faith and credit of the United States to guarantee the mafiocracy that is now fueling fascism. That's our reality. You can't escape that no matter who you are. And there is nobody in the Democratic Party that is putting up a plan to be able to turn the tables on this. Why, Reagan?
They're part of the same system and they might just be imperialists.
Because they're controlled by the same system and they don't want to break the grip of the tyrants. So it's up to we, the people. The way we're going to do this is, first and foremost, we're going to create a new modern day Glass-Steagall Act, because you got to separate commercial banking from investment banking, with the caveat that you cannot, as we just exemplified through Federal Reserve Act 13.3, use the full faith and credit of the United States to float global racketeering. Does that make sense, Reagan?
Absolutely. And that's why from the global perspective, the Clean New Deal applies everywhere, because while this is going on everywhere, Patrick is entirely right to keep insisting on the fact that it's illegal. And the United States is unique. I live in a colony, and when you get down to the bare bones of it, this ain't illegal up here in a colony. These crimes go on because only in America are these crimes illegal. Still, despite everything going on, the books are there, and Bill Black is there, that it's the only place in the world ever imperialism has been illegal and successfully prosecuted. And Patrick has all the same characters laying out the pathway, the steps, cover all of our bases, the full perspective of the media, everything, and not just for Americans. Everyone else needs to understand this and support Americans, because now you're our only hope.
Thank you. And I will say this, it's amazing. I get compliments all the time from people in the UK, from South Africa, from New Zealand, from Australia, from Canada, mostly Canada. To all of you Canadians out there who are freedom loving, democracy, principled, based on the integrity of law. The thing is, there are millions of us out there. And I'm so proud to have connected with you because, of course, It was the purpose of the United States. And that's what I grew up with, believing in. But I always kind of suspected there was something weird happening in the shadows. And it wasn't until my life was completely disrupted that I ended up going on this massive journey to, meet people like Reagan. But the bottom line is we are all in this together. For those of you who fictionally love the idea of Star Trek, and I know we both like Giannis Varoufakis, he loves Star Trek, right? There is a just world based on the professionalism and the character and the principled ethos of living up to the best of our ability, right? But you cannot do that if you cannot hold power to account. So moving forward, by the way, all of these things that I'm introducing you were all illegal in the United States, and they still are illegal, especially as it relates to Federal Reserve Act 13.3. Nobody has changed the statutes, and that's what I continue to reveal over and over and over. When you understand that the 2008 great financial crisis created a $42 trillion hit to our GDP, when you understand that in 2009, we gave them $33 trillion, them, the people that created this global calamity. If you want to understand the global calamity, we put it all together piece by piece in the con. And quite frankly, Forward 13 is prologue. But the bottom line is we did the work that the government of the United States didn't do because of corruption. But what I'm trying to expose to all of you out there, you've got to quit putting your faith into politicians that have been here in this system for the past 20 years. They're the reason we're in this mess. They didn't stop it before. They're not going to stop it now. We need tens of millions of people to get on board with the Clean New Deal from around the world. In fact, one guy running for District 8, which is going to run against Hakeem Jeffries in New York, when we went through this whole process with him, he got to it at the end. He's like, my God, this is something that the whole world could use. And to the point of my friend Reagan Boychek, he's absolutely right. This has to become a global movement to purge the misery of tyranny, corruption, and the pollution that is destroying the world, because it's only a small percentage of these people that have complete control that are all by the book criminals. Okay. Epstein is the tip of the iceberg. Moving forward, we've got to end Citizens United because dark money, anything that happens in the dark is not good. Just ask people that were on trains during the P. Diddy circus. I mean, that's just part and parcel to how this stuff plays out. It's rape and pillage 101. And if you're going to be a victim of that, don't sit silent. Get empowered. Understand that this is how we destroy the people that are destroying everybody else. Then 3, we're going to demonstrate how 71 trillion was looted illegally. And we're going to set up micro camps to be able to figure out ways within this new government moving forward to celebrate or to restore the law and to get rid of the oligarchs and to restore accountability and dynamism, quite frankly. We want people to discover wonderful new ways of moving forward, particularly with energy, particularly with infrastructure. There's so many problems. There's just never been a better time to find solutions to problems. But how do we find the money to do that? Like Reagan demonstrated, it's not having the money. It's having the control to be able to put the money to the productive capacity within the law so that we, the people, can function and thrive. Without it, you're just going to have people that want to rape and destroy. And if you give them more power, they're going to take more power. And the problem is with all of you who get into your microcosms and everything else, your siloed projects, some people out there might be going, look, I want to see a detailed analysis of how you're going to support Medicare for all. We can certainly discuss that. Or how you're going to recreate a renewable energy paradigm. Certainly we can discuss that as long as we've got more people running for office that can get into create the budget in Congress to be able to deal with this. Once you understand that Congress is supposed to have the power of the purse and we have fiat currency, and it's not a question of money, it's about power, control, direction of projects, and also taking care of our friends up north and not being a threat to them and working with them to help them become the best possible versions of themselves as opposed to exploiting them. I've never been okay with slavery. In fact, I'm not your savior. I'm not somebody trying to tell you that I want to be your dictator. I'm a liberator. That's what it's all about. Liberation from slavery, because we've spent the millions of dollars to get this information. We know exactly what the entire system isn't telling you, but I do have to thank Donald Trump from this point, from this vantage. The guy's shoving such a giant shit sandwich down everybody's throat. It doesn't matter what silo you're in. You cannot ignore this. The damage is calamitous. It's across the board. Nobody can hide from this thing, and it's going to get worse unless we, the people, bring the truth up and levy it above this ocean of madness and lies. Because at that point, they can't piss on your head telling you it's rain. We're going to have to expand the Supreme Court to 13 justices to outflank the Roberts Court. We're going to end qualified immunity and the presidential immunity and the electoral college and judicial immunity. We're going to institute term limits for U.S. senators and representatives, and we're going to prohibit all insider trading for all members of the Senate, House of Representatives, and the Supreme Court, and the administration's cabinet administrators. My friends, how did Marjorie Taylor Greene go from $700,000 net worth when she entered Congress 6 years ago to worth now over $27 million? So if you become a representative of the House, I think you get a salary of $160,000. That's a little different than over $4 million a year, quite frankly. For what exactly? And she's no hero, even though she's siding, of course, with the Epstein victims, but she became a target, obviously, of Trump because of that. So it's a pretty unbelievably dangerous time period for the world. But Reagan, we have the answers, do we not?
Without a doubt, and the money to pay for it. Things like a debt jubilee, free education are a matter of mechanics, not possibility if we enforce the rule of law democratically. There's still a bright future left.
And you hit the most important point of all. What I'm trying to tell, I don't care what your ism is, okay? Again, there's people out there that are looking at the Mondami victory as a linchpin of a national movement that's going to create a pushback against the oligarchic class. It's not going to do that if we don't understand the oligarchic class has stolen tens of trillions of dollars illegally. Do we not think, Reagan, that Trump's not going to send troops into the states to be able to control the levers of the election to make it appear as if we have an election? They're going to sabotage it. There's no question about it. Everything that I see in terms of the election is a foregone conclusion that Trump is going to be able to, and his cronies are going to be able to steal it, just like Putin has done for the last, 24 years or so. And the bottom line is, unless tens of millions of us come to the table in the midterm, equipped with the truth to get those in Congress that are going to be able to actually drop the hammer on Trump. And so here's one other thing I might say. Is it possible for anybody running for Congress to not run on putting Trump in jail?
There's no time for any different.
There's no time for any different. And if somebody's not saying that, it's just the bare basics, right? If AOC and Bernie aren't saying that Trump has to be put in prison, what do you think? What message are they sending?
That failing to do that would be failing to distinguish themselves from the Democratic Party of FDR that absorbed Canada, that have been imperialists playing this game, that were around in 2008. I think we need to, 2026 is the year. The worst nightmare for these characters is for the crash to happen on someone else's watch. They want things to collapse soon. They're doing their best to discredit the Democrats, to now it's okay to talk about Epstein. It's okay to talk about them 20 years later because they might be in charge next. But Trump and his friends want this crash to come as soon as possible so they can wield the clubs and the boots and decide how things are going to shake out. That needs to happen in his term. 2026 is the year that people have to wake up, because Americans themselves are going to be on the business end of the next crash. And it's imminent, but if it's properly understood, it's possible to avoid it. Any politician who fails is part of the problem, if not worse. It's not possible to be ignorant of these things anymore, and any politician that doesn't absorb this into their world, there's no time for that anymore. This is the last call. We've been saying this for a long time. The actions of the government are screaming it. Every hint or worry you have about the election, they have taken the trouble to televise some explicit hints that they can always point back to. Oh yeah, it was coming. Everybody sort of agreed all the time. but that doesn't mean it's going to happen. It could be thwarted. There could be elections, but this is the year. And at some point, it will be too late. It will be too far gone. There will not be enough to get back, especially on a planetary environment, climate. There's limits, and we're getting terrifyingly close to them. But it's not unknown. It's not that there isn't a solution. It's not that we can't afford it. But it's a race against time, and ignorance is their biggest weapon. All of this is premised on their ignorance. Piercing that is filtered through the media, which they've just bought up with all of their capital gains and imposed ever more stringent censorship to maintain sufficient ignorance. But that's our job. That's our goal. That's what we're trying to do. That's the vulnerability of everything wrong in this world, is the ignorance that allows it to continue, is its biggest vulnerability. That's what you've been working on for 13 years. And everything I've found before and after aligns perfectly with that. And it's hopeful. And it makes sense of this weekend in Venezuela perfectly. It points to the solution clearly. The characters necessary were the same as last week, but everyone can see it now, and should only make our job easier.
Well, again, I mean, I've said for now years that corruption births and fuels fascism. I've been saying for years that we've been, not a democracy, not a capitalistic system. It's all about the tyranny of misery. It's all about the free lunch for the elite. Well, they call them elite, but we know that the predatory class, the rapist class, the tyrannical techno feudalism, whatever, all of these different elements that put into it, right? But yes, this is, and I hate to use biblical references, but it's so true, man. It is the end, because when the lies, or you can just, insert Game of Thrones. Okay, forget the biblical references. Put in Jon Snow when he discovered at the end that when facing the existential threat, when people just keep lying, all you get better and better lies, and words stop meaning anything. Yes, it's all about character. It's all about integrity. All of us have two columns of our soul. Character, integrity, decency, dignity versus hypocrisy, duplicity, complicity. Anybody can lie, but the truth is what has to be accountable. And the bottom line is, if we want to live in a dynamic world, you have to put your head around, if you, me, and everyone you see who isn't a Nazi, who believes in dignity and decency and beauty and sustainability and integrity and liberty and justice, we have to merge in unity behind the Clean New Deal. And it'll be our destiny to purge the misery of tyranny, to unleash the renaissance of possibility. But all you have to do, and this is cosmology, this is the universal truth, light overcomes darkness with the with the power of the supernova. You've got to become a nuclear reaction to the big bang of truth that we're dropping, and you got to stop buying lies. You got to stop lying, because it's this simple. Systems work when the right people are in charge of the systems to put them in place so that all of the stuff can function. That's how we can fly. That's how we can make bridges that work. That's how we have buildings that stand. This isn't rocket science. It's racketeering. So that's all I have to say, which was plenty. But thank you so much, Reagan, as always. I hope all is well with you. All the best to you and your cat and your lovely family. And we really got a great show with your cat in the background. So this was a lot of fun. Thank you for everything. And I'll talk to you soon. Okay, my man?
Take care.
Take care. Bye.